Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 97. Mok Jung-un couldn't help but be inwardly astonished by the number of bookshelves surrounding the entire cavern and the abundance of secret manuals filling them. Apart from martial arts, it seemed to be the first time he had seen such a vast quantity of books since his birth. Moreover, all of these were secret manuals. Which sword technique, which footwork method, which palm technique, which cultivation method. The sheer number was so vast that he couldn't even fathom where to start. One Shurchen Ha. Before seeing this place, he had thought it was quite a generous amount of time. However, upon witnessing the immense collection of martial arts books, he realized that the time might not be as ample as he had initially thought. Just then, Chong Ryong's voice rang in his ears. They're all useless. What? Mok Jung-un replied in a whisper. She then said, the ones placed around the perimeter are all secret manuals that would only be coveted by those aiming for third-rate or at most first-rate martial arts. Is that so? Can't you tell at a glance? I can't tell at a glance. Well, it's impossible for a mortal like you who has just entered the path to have discerning eyes. Chong Ryong clicked her tongue and said. However, this wasn't Mok Jung-un's fault. Thanks to various fortuitous encounters, his transcendent memory, and a body that could manifest it, he was growing at an incomparable speed compared to ordinary geniuses. But considering the short time since his initiation, his insight couldn't be that broad. You should be grateful to this venerable one, mortal. Is that so? With your insignificant insight, you wouldn't be able to discern the martial arts that are somewhat useful, would you? Well, that's true. Mok Jung-un readily agreed. At his response, Chong Ryong felt deflated. In fact, from Mok Jung-un's perspective, there was no reason to assert his pride in such matters. Will you choose for me? Didn't I tell you? With your insight you would only waste time, so this venerable one will select the useful ones for you. That's something to be grateful for. First, go to the upper floor. Upper floor? Was there an upper floor here? As he wondered, Chong Ryong said, can't you see that the bookshelves reach the ceiling? Ah. Upon closer inspection, there were supports placed between the bookshelves at intervals, allowing one to walk up to about 2 or 3 floors high. However, judging from her tone, it seemed as if she was well acquainted with the structure of this place. So as Mok Jung-un moved, he asked, have you been here before? Impossible. But you seem to know quite a lot. Telling me to go upstairs without properly examining the secret manuals. Did she know what was up there and tell him to go up? At this, Chong Ryong chuckled and said, judging from the structure here, they have replicated the treasure vault from the main headquarters. The main headquarters? Yes. There is also a treasure vault in the main headquarters. It seems they have brought copies of the secret manuals from there and placed them here. Ah, is that so? It seems like a hassle when only a few people would properly see them. They could have just brought the good secret manuals. Then Chong Ryong snorted and said, ha. If you don't know, just stay quiet. What? The fact that they created a treasure vault filled with copies deep in the mountains and cliffs, rather than in the main headquarters, is probably a precautionary measure. Precautionary measure? Perhaps in case of an unexpected invasion? Invasion? You mean in case the main headquarters is attacked? Yes. Think about it. No matter how powerful a martial arts sect is, as time passes and generations change, it's common for them to weaken and collapse, like the natural order of things. Ah, so they made copies in advance? Probably. If the main headquarters were to be attacked, it would be natural to burn or destroy the treasure vault to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. While destroying it is easy, moving or protecting it is difficult, so they prepared in advance. Indeed. I don't know whose idea this was, but it's a good strategy. I agree. Mok Jung-un nodded in agreement. Having learned to some extent how much martial artists cherished and coveted martial arts secret manuals, he recognized that they were a significant asset to them. Considering that it would be impossible to move this vast treasure vault all at once, it was the right choice. Creak. It seems they don't maintain it as much as I thought. The wooden frame leading to the upper level creaked and swayed. Unlike the main headquarters, the treasure vault within Corpse Blood Valley was not frequently used, so perhaps that was the reason. What are you going to do? What do you think I'll do? Knowing your personality, you won't be satisfied with just 1 or 2 necessary items. Since we're here, it would be nice to look for useful things all around. At Mok Jaeongun's words, Chong Ryong chuckled. Mok Jaeongun's transcendent memory was helpful wherever he went, but in situations like this, it could be considered the best. I was curious, so this is perfect. Chong Ryong had been wondering about the extent of Mok Jaeongun's memory, which could perfectly memorize something after seeing it once. Seemed like a good opportunity to test how much he could memorize. As they were contemplating, the Guardian Unit leader Yang Moo-won, who was about to light an incense stick and measure time at the entrance of the treasure vault below, gazed at Mok Jaeongun with a puzzled expression. That kid. How did he go up there so quickly? In fact, the lowest shelves of the treasure vault contained basic techniques and secret manuals suitable for martial artists ranging from third-rate to first-rate. The real deal started from the second-floor shelves, but as soon as he entered, he barely glanced at the lower section and went straight up. Anyone who saw him would think he had been here several times, given how natural his movements were. After a moment of puzzlement, Unit Leader Yang Moo-won decided to ignore it. In any case, his task was to be the guardian of the treasure vault, and all he had to do was ensure that the child didn't secretly take out any unauthorized manuals. Just then, did he find something useful? He noticed Mok Jaeongun pulling out a secret manual from the bookshelf. No matter how good one's inner strength and eyesight were, it was impossible to know exactly what he had taken out from this distance. However, from the second floor onwards, there were quite a few ascending martial arts. There were secret manuals aimed at the peak realm and above, so whatever he chose would be beneficial to him. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Mok Jaeongun was seen flipping through the secret manual as if skimming it. He was flipping through it quite quickly, but could he properly read the contents written inside like that? Just then, after going through the entire book, he placed it back on the shelf. Did he even read it properly? Why was he skimming through it like that? Even if he only had one shurchen, if he had the discernment to go straight to the second floor, he could have carefully selected from there. Tap. Mok Jaeongun was seen pulling out another secret manual. Then, just like before, he started flipping through the pages at an incredible speed, rustling the pages. What is he doing? At that speed, he wasn't skimming but merely turning the pages. Could he even understand the contents by reading like that? However, it wasn't only Unit Leader Yang Moo-won who was thinking this way. This brat. Was he really examining it properly? He was flipping through the book too quickly, almost to the extent of simply opening and immediately turning the page rather than reading. Chong Ryong asked just in case. Mortal, are you really memorizing it? If you flip through it so quickly. Rustle, 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 tap. Mok Jaeongun closed the last page of the secret manual and whispered. Yes. Of course I'm memorizing it. Memorizing it? No matter how good one's memory was, didn't they need to read the text to some extent to memorize it? In Chong Ryong's eyes, Mok Jaeongun wasn't even skimming but merely opening the book and immediately turning to the next page. However, if I'm not trying to understand it right away, I can memorize it just by looking at it. What? At Mok Jaeongun's words, Chong Ryong was momentarily at a loss for words. He was reading the contents so quickly that it was almost like skimming. No, it was closer to just looking at it, yet he claimed to have memorized everything? For a moment she was dumbfounded. Even as a spirit, her memory was different from humans, but it was still difficult to do that. An absurd memory. She had initially thought his memory was already at an unbelievable level, but this surpassed human limits. Mok Jaeongun asked her, who was stunned and speechless. What's the next useful secret manual? Next? Really what? For a moment she almost asked if he was truly human. Not only his acceptance of the energy of death but also his memory was beyond extraordinary, surpassing the level of ordinary humans. It might be strange for a spirit like her to say this, but he really didn't seem human. Chong Ryong, who had been staring intently at Mok Jaeongun, finally came to her senses and said, The next one is, why is that there? What are you looking at? Look at the third shelf from the bottom on the right where you're currently looking. Profound Mystic Foot Technique. 1. Judging from the characters, foot technique, it seemed to be a martial art that utilized the feet. Chong Ryong said to Mok Jaeongun, It's the foot technique of the Myeong Sun School. 2. It was offered by a school that joined the Heaven and Earth Society in its early days. It's a foot technique that excels in agility and variation, and with a little modification, it can be classified as an early ascending martial art. Early ascending? According to Chong Ryong, martial arts that aimed for the peak realm or early stage of transcendent realm were classified as ascending martial arts. And martial arts that had the potential and insight to go beyond the early stage of transcendent realm were supposed to be classified as early ascending martial arts. In that case, why is this here? She had said it should be on the 3rd floor. At this question, Chong Ryong also muttered as if she couldn't understand. Who knows? This venerable one had originally classified the profound mystic foot technique as an early ascending martial art and placed it on the 3rd floor. But if it had been moved down, could it be him? There was a possibility. After all, he had denied and overturned everything about himself. Clicking her tongue as if it was absurd, she said, "Anyway, it would be good for you to learn the profound mystic foot technique. This venerable one guarantees that it's hard to find a foot technique as good as this within the entire heaven and earth society." That's how versatile and swift it was, making it the most suitable for attacking and seizing opportunities. At her words, Mok Jae-eun flipped through the profound mystic foot technique and memorized it. She stuck out her tongue as if she couldn't get used to it no matter how much she looked. It was truly a crazy memory. It took about 15 counts to memorize an entire book. Russell. Tap. Next. 5th from the bottom on the right. Yes. At this rate, it seemed like he could memorize dozens, no, even hundreds of books before leaving. Although it was questionable whether there was a need to memorize that many. If he did, it would be an opportunity to greatly expand his insight into martial arts. Wasn't it said that in ancient times an imperial official named Huang Sang became a peerless expert by simply reading thousands of Taoist secret manuals, opening his meridians and attaining enlightenment about qi? Each secret manual contained its own insights, so if this mortal fellow truly had talent, he would gain something from it. Russell. Tap. Next. It was really hard to get used to. It was instantaneous. The one next to it. Why? Is there another martial art like the profound mystic foot technique? No, that's not it, but the supreme ultimate soft palm. 3. Over there is a palm technique of the Wudang sect. Wudang sect? Is that also a martial arts school? I'm constantly witnessing the limits of your knowledge. He really knew nothing about the martial arts world, even to an excessive extent. So, Chong Ryong said, the Wudang sect can be considered the pinnacle of Taoist martial arts, and among the righteous factions, it is called the Supreme Martial Arts School, surpassing even the famous schools. It must be an incredible place. Indeed. It's not one of the 9 schools in one sect for nothing. What are the 9 schools in one sect? I don't have time to explain every single thing, so to put it simply, there are 9 martial arts schools and one sect that are regarded as the best even among the righteous factions. The Wudang sect is one of them. Is that so? Then it would be better to learn this as well. No. Actually, I was going to tell you not to learn it. At those words, Mok Jae-eun asked in puzzlement. Why? If it's a martial art from such an incredible place. Of course it would be useful. However, for you, Taoist martial arts might actually be. Why? It's because it could be poisonous to you. Poisonous? Most of the energy occupying your body is the energy of death. However, Taoist martial arts are based on the principles of nourishing life. So, if you carelessly learn it, it might clash with the death energy, which is why I was hesitating. Is that so? It made sense for Chong Ryong to be contemplating. In that case, it might be better not to learn it, but still, I'll memorize it. What? No. How do you know if it might come in handy? Come in handy? Didn't you tell me before, Chong Ryong? What did I say? That just by looking at the wounds or traces left by martial arts, you can identify which school it belongs to and what type it is. I did say that. Couldn't this be used in a similar way if utilized well? You couldn't possibly. Mok Jae-eun smiled. Seeing this, Chong Ryong clicked her tongue inwardly. Whenever this fellow learned something, the ways he thought of utilizing it were truly beyond what others could imagine. He would be a really troublesome individual to have as an enemy. As Mok Jae-eun was about to pull out the secret manual of the Wudang sect's supreme ultimate soft palm. Mok Jae-eun looked puzzled as he examined the book. That's because a part of the secret manual was dark red, as if it had been stained with blood. Moreover, the secret manual seemed quite old. So Mok Jae-eun asked, "Didn't you say they only collected copies?" At Mok Jae-eun's question, Chong Ryong also found it strange. The book currently grasped in Mok Jae-eun's hand was probably It seems to be the original. Chapter 98. It doesn't seem to be a copy? Yes. At least not this one. At Mok Jae-un's query, Chong Ryong said as if it was unexpected. That's because even if it was a copy, it was natural for a book to become worn out after a long time. However, since it was newly transcribed and not frequently used, there was no way traces resembling bloodstains would remain. That makes sense. Well, there could be various reasons. Either they accidentally placed the original here, or the copy was clean, so they kept it in the main headquarters. The original wouldn't be mixed up for such reasons. Chong Ryong firmly denied Mok Jae-un's speculations. What? You may not know yet, mortal, but the original holds a special meaning. Meaning? In what way? Most original secret manuals are written by the creator of that martial art. In that case, it would have value as the creator's original work. He seemed to have heard this from his grandfather. The value of a poem transcribed from Confucius and a poem directly written by Confucius was different. Seemed to be in that sense. As they were conversing, Chong Ryong continued. While the creator's value and such can be a reason, what's more important are the engraved characters. Characters. The strokes are traces. What did this venerable one tell you when teaching you martial arts, mortal? Traces are the martial art itself. Would Mok Jae-un be able to accurately understand why she said this? The breadth of understanding varies depending on one's enlightenment. Even if one's cultivation reaches the pinnacle stage of peak realm, if their enlightenment is still lacking, they may not understand what she means at all. However, nothing contains as much as the strokes. Each trace within them may contain the habits of the martial arts creator. Those habits would also include the trajectory of the techniques. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her surprise at Mok Jae-un's words. She hadn't had high expectations. Yet Mok Jae-un had given the exact answer she wanted to hear. This brat. He didn't merely possess a superhuman memory. His comprehension was also exceptional. A little brat who had only learned martial arts for a short time was naturally speaking about the principles of ascending martial arts, which would be somewhat understandable for those entering the early transcendent realm. Of course, it wasn't as if he had truly attained enlightenment, but it was quite astonishing. I wonder what would have happened if this kid had started cultivating martial arts at a younger age. Perhaps he might have displayed the remarkable feat of reaching the early transcendent realm before even coming of age. Mok Jae-un's talent was so fearsome that it felt frightening, regardless of whether she liked him or not. As she was marveling, Mok Jae-un asked, "Was I wrong?" Well, you somewhat understood. She didn't want to praise him excessively as it could lead to complacency. However, at her response, Mok Jae-un chuckled. After he spoke, it took her a while to answer, so how could it be considered somewhat understanding? I must have been accurate. However, he had no intention of boasting about it. For him, mastering martial arts was merely sharpening a blade for the sake of revenge. Chong Ryong said to Mok Jae-un, "Ahem. Anyway, as you said, the original contains the creator's true intention in each stroke. So it's almost like condensed enlightenment. That's why even high-level experts strive to broaden their insight by reading various original martial arts secret manuals." I see. I learned something valuable. In any case, the presence of this secret manual here doesn't seem to be a mistake. Since copies didn't contain the creator's true intention, she believed it wasn't a mistake or a replacement due to the book being dirty. Mok Jae-un nodded and said, "I understand. Since we don't have much time, I'll continue memorizing." "Go ahead. Rustle. Rustle." Mok Jae-un turned the pages. Just like before, he tried to imprint it with his eyes as if stamping a seal. Strokes. The human consciousness sometimes moves in ways contrary to one's intentions. Mok Jae-un, who had come to understand the meaning of strokes through Chong Ryong, started memorizing not only the characters but also the appearance of the strokes. The thickness of the strokes. The movement of the wrist could be seen based on the thickness. Then at some point during the process of imprinting, a peculiar phenomenon occurred in Mok Jae-un's mind. This was something even Chong Ryong had not anticipated. In Mok Jae-un's mind, he saw an old Taoist with an unseen face softly tracing the trajectory of palm techniques as if dancing. They were the techniques of the supreme ultimate soft palm. It was an astonishing occurrence. While reading the text, how could each movement be seen so accurately? He could even see where strength was applied and released. It was truly a bizarre event. Thanks to this, The most primitive techniques intended by the martial arts creator were directly imprinted in Mok Jae-un's mind. At that moment, a mnemonic chant flashed through Mok Jae-un's mind. Rustle, rustle. When he turned the last page, Mok Jae-un's expression was somewhat elated. What is this? It was an emotion he had never felt before. It was as if, for a brief moment, he had become one with the creator of this martial art and tasted the true flow of the supreme ultimate soft palms techniques. It was a completely different feeling compared to when he thought he would simply imprint and follow with his body. Not bad. He wanted to savor this feeling again. However, unfortunately, apart from this supreme ultimate soft palm manual, most of the other martial arts secret manuals would be copies. In that case, he might not be able to experience this feeling. Mok Jae-un, who had a disappointed expression, asked, "What would be good to learn next?" "Not here. Look at the 6th from the bottom on the next bookshelf." 6th. This time it was a sword technique manual called Immeasurable 15 Swords. 1. As Mok Jae-un opened the secret manual, he naturally thought it was a copy, but due to the habit he had developed earlier, he couldn't help but meticulously imprint the strokes engraved in the characters. However, in Mok Jae-un's mind, he saw a middle-aged master displaying sword techniques again. The middle-aged master's sword techniques were performed with a heavy sword, and each time he swung the sword, the force carried at the tip of the sword soared abruptly, as if it were immeasurable, just like the name. For Mok Jae-un, who had never learned a heavy sword with weight, this sword technique was a new experience. Squirm. This guy. Chong Ryong, who had been watching Mok Jae-un turn the pages, couldn't hide her puzzlement. That's because Mok Jae-un's speed of turning the pages had slowed down a bit compared to before. Now, it took about 25 to 30 counts to skim through a single secret manual, slightly slower than before. Of course, even the slower speed was still incomparably faster than ordinary people. Why are you doing that? It took a bit more time, right? Even though it's slower than before, didn't it only take you about 25 to 30 counts? Was it only that much? Yes. At Chong Ryong's words, Mok Jae-un was inwardly surprised. Just like with the supreme ultimate soft palm, he had felt as if he had become one with the creator of this immeasurable 15 swords and experienced the feeling of performing the techniques together, so it seemed like time was passing very slowly. Yet it had only been that much. It's peculiar. To think it only flowed that much. Wait, are you saying you felt as if time was passing slowly? Yes. She let out a sigh as if dumbfounded. Mok Jae-un asked in puzzlement, "Why are you reacting like that?" "It's a state of selflessness. The state of selflessness *Mueji Jaeong. As the name suggests, it refers to a stage where one's mind is immersed in something, forgetting oneself. Yet Mok Jae-un, who still lacked enlightenment, fell into a state of selflessness while reading mnemonic chants. Such cases were extremely rare. Should I be happy about this? She wasn't sure what to say to him. Whether it was an ordinary genius or a martial arts genius, when learning martial arts, the order of learning and direction of enlightenment tended to flow in a somewhat similar manner. However, Mok Jae-un's order was completely jumbled. Falling into a state of selflessness not during meditation but while memorizing martial arts secret manuals? Had there ever been such a case? But what did he immerse himself in? The process of memorizing secret manuals was even faster than speed reading, so what could he have immersed himself in during that brief moment? Although she was curious, there wasn't much time, so don't be conscious of falling into a state of selflessness. It means you're gaining something from it. Is that so? Rather than that, let's hurry and memorize other secret manuals. We need to quickly finish the second floor and move to the third floor. The second floor could be considered a taste of the ascending martial arts. On the third floor, there were some early ascending martial arts that even she acknowledged. If he memorized all of those, Mok Jae-un's insight into martial arts would become incomparable to before entering this place. What a pity. Chong Ryong suddenly couldn't help but feel regret. If this were the main headquarters treasure vault, she knew of a few hidden secret manuals. However, since this place was a collection of copies, there was no way those hidden ones would have been transcribed here. In this manner, Mok Jae-un memorized 45 martial arts secret manuals on the second floor of the treasure vault during those few moments. Originally, he would have read a larger quantity, but as he fell into a state of selflessness for a longer duration with each book, it took this much time. Although it wasn't a very long time, it felt lengthy to Mok Jae-un. Now let's go to the third floor. Yes. Having memorized all the useful ones on the second floor, they went up. Upon going up, unlike the bookshelves on the lower floor, some empty spaces could be seen here and there. Unlike the secret manuals on the lower floors, most of the ones on the third floor were ascending martial arts, with occasional early ascending martial arts mixed in, so there was naturally a limit to the quantity. They really replicated it almost identically. Looking at the bookshelves on the third floor, Chong Ryong clicked her tongue inwardly. That's because although some parts were different or the number of secret manuals had increased, it was quite close to the arrangement she remembered. Even though they were copies, they were organized well enough to remind her of the past. If this memory was correct, in the original library on the top right end of the third bookshelf from the right, there should be that secret manual she had hidden. For a moment, Chong Ryong doubted her eyes. Exactly in that position, the secret manual called Yang White Sword Technique, which she had placed on the bookshelf, was there. They made a copy of that too? That couldn't be. Except for the 2 torn pages hidden inside, it was a sword technique manual with a composition that would only be helpful for second-rate or first-rate practitioners. There was no way they would have transcribed it as a copy. Even if they did, excluding the damaged part, they would have moved it to the first floor, not the third floor. Ryong. Chong Ryong. Which secret manual would be good to look at next? At that question, Chong Ryong said, just in case, take out the one on the top right end of the third bookshelf from the right. Yang White Sword Technique? Yes. Following her instructions, Mok Jae-eun went to the third bookshelf and took out the secret manual called Yang White Sword Technique from the top right end. However, the ink on the outer part of the book was smudged and the front page was slightly curled up. Seeing this, she let out a fake cough as if dumbfounded. Mok Jae-eun asked in puzzlement, "Why are you reacting like that? Why did I realize it only now? This venerable one is quite foolish. What are you talking about? They moved it here. What do you mean by moved? The secret manuals here are the originals." What? Are you saying these are the originals? Yes. I thought something was strange. Now that I've seen the secret manual in your hand, I'm certain. At her words, Mok Jae-eun's eyes narrowed. In fact, although he hadn't mentioned it to her, Mok Jae-eun had also fallen into a state of selflessness while memorizing the secret manuals she had selected for him. So he had inwardly questioned whether the secret manuals here were really copies. However, judging from her words, it seemed the secret manuals here were indeed the originals. But Mok Jae-eun didn't show it and opened the secret manual. Then, a folded piece of paper was inserted between the pages of the secret manual. It was still here. You know about it? How could I not know? This venerable one personally placed it here. To think it remained until now. You seem quite delighted. Ahem. That's understandable. But what is this? Mok Jae-eun said as he took out the folded piece of paper. Then she spoke in a somewhat meaningful tone. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this is where this venerable one's completed sword techniques of the moon began. Oh ho. Curious, Mok Jae-eun unfolded the piece of paper. Upon unfolding it, the front and back of the paper contained mnemonic chants of sword techniques. On the front, the name of this sword technique and the techniques were written first. Moonless Void Sword. Consider it your fortune. These are the only remaining sword techniques of the Moonless Void Sword, one of the 5 great sword techniques that once symbolized the old martial arts world. At her words, Mok Jae-eun visually imprinted the sword techniques. Then in his mind he saw someone with a pale face and a scholar-like appearance holding a sword and displaying the techniques. Shudder. For a moment, goosebumps rose all over Mok Jae-eun's body. The sword techniques were on a different level from the ones he had seen so far, bringing a thrilling sensation. Chapter 99. Moonless Void Sword, Moon Fragrance Defeating Sword. The moment he imprinted this technique, Mok Jae-eun saw someone with a pale face and a scholar-like appearance holding a sword and displaying the technique in his mind. Swish 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 swish. The sword path resembled a full moon, and upon seeing it, goosebumps rose all over Mok Jae-eun's body. Since entering the treasure vault of Corpse Blood Valley, he had experienced a state of selflessness through imprinting the sword techniques Chong Ryong had told him to memorize, but this sword technique evoked an incomparable thrill compared to those. Mok Jae-eun stared blankly at the technique. Watching Mok Jae-eun, who was so immersed, Chong Ryong thought to herself, "He has just started. but to enter a state of selflessness immediately upon seeing it. His concentration is remarkable. Judging from his trembling eyes, it seems this mortal brat is also quite astonished by the sword technique, which is on a different level from what he has seen so far. It's understandable. Even she herself had marveled at it when she saw it during her lifetime. Moonless Void Sword, Moon Fragrance Defeating Sword. It was the sword technique of a peerless swordsman, one of the top 5 in the world, during the lost era of the old martial arts world, which was known as the most fierce. Although only 2 techniques remained, all of them damaged, she had gained so much enlightenment from seeing them that she completed her unfinished sword techniques of the moon. If he grasps even a little of the true value contained in the strokes, his insight into the sword will improve by leaps and bounds, regardless of the duration of his cultivation. Of course, it was uncertain to what extent Mok Jaeungun's level would allow him to discern it. However, unlike before, the state of selflessness was considerably long. Most of the other books had ended around 30 counts, but he was still gazing at this technique. Spark, spark. There's no excess. Mok Jaeungun kept exclaiming in admiration as he watched the middle-aged man perform this technique. The sword techniques he had seen so far often had unnecessary movements or sword paths that caught his eye, but this sword technique had none of that. Each trajectory was beautiful, but it was thoroughly focused on killing the opponent. It was like looking at a work of art. There was a charm to staring at it intently. For Mok Jaeungun, this sword technique possessed the aesthetics of the sword and death. Swish. Mok Jaeungun assimilated with the middle-aged man in scholar's attire and began to display the sword technique together. At that moment, swoosh. The energy of death, the death chi, flowed out from Mok Jaeungun's body. What? While this wouldn't be visible to the eyes of an ordinary person, it was clearly visible to Chong Ryong's ghostly eyes. The surging death chi was rapidly spreading to the surroundings. Chong Ryong, who had been about to call out to Mok Jaeungun, stopped. Thinking about it, the death chi wasn't something that living beings could perceive, and judging from Mok Jaeungun's current state, it seemed he had gone beyond a state of selflessness and attained some kind of enlightenment. What did he realize to make the death chi flow out of his body and take shape? He was curious. The flowing death chi swayed and rippled like waves. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her inner astonishment upon seeing this. Although it appeared to be a simple ripple, to the eyes of those who had surpassed the peak and had depth in martial arts like her, it looked like a sword chi. This guy. Could it be? Was he assimilating with the strokes written in the sword technique and visualizing the technique in his mind? Chong Ryong was dumbfounded. It was something absolutely impossible at Mok Jaeungun's level. Only when one reached the early stage of Transcendent Realm could they visualize and implant an image in their mind by looking at characters or sword traces. Yet Mok Jaeungun, who hadn't even attained enlightenment at the peak realm, was doing it? How many times is he going to surprise me in a single day? Drawing an image through the sword technique and gaining enlightenment from it. Something she hadn't expected at all was happening at this fellow's level. As Chong Ryong was waiting, clank, clank, at the end of the 3rd floor where the bookshelves were displayed, there was an entrance in the form of a cave excavated from the cavern to the inside. A red line was drawn there, and one of the bookshelves inside started to make a clanking sound. However, the sound wasn't very loud, and neither Chong Ryong, who was inside the wooden doll, nor Mok Jaeungun, who had entered a state of selflessness, heard it. Phew. Corpse Blood Valley's senior warrior Guak Munji let out a sigh with an irritated expression. Only he and Valley Master Li Jiom knew the location of this place in Corpse Blood Valley, so he had no choice but to guide them personally instead of ordering his subordinates. As a result, he had to wait here for a sick hen. He was filled with dissatisfaction because he had to do this for a fellow who was not only a hostage from the righteous faction but also someone he didn't particularly like. I don't understand. Why is the society leader doing this, and why is the Valley Master acting like so? The society leader's whims were nothing new, so that could be overlooked, but Valley Master Li Jiom, although not openly showing it, didn't really like the society leader. Yet he couldn't understand why he was extending courtesies to someone who could become an arrow aimed at him, unlike his usual self. What could he be thinking? His mind was filled with doubts. Rustle. At the sound of rustling leaves coming from somewhere, Guak Munji flinched and turned his head. At that moment his eyes widened. Suddenly behind him, there was someone with a slender build wearing a straw hat with a veil. and a handsome young man who appeared to be in his early 20s with a large sword on his back. Who dares? This was Corpse Blood Valley. Just who were these people to intrude here? Guac Mungiai was about to move his hand to the sword hilt at his waist. Right at that moment. What? Before he could even draw his sword, the young man firmly pressed down on the back of his hand. This. Judging from your belt, you seem to be a warrior of Corpse Blood Valley. Calm down. At the young man's words, senior warrior Guac Mungiai frowned. This young man knew his identity. Not only did he possess extraordinary lightness skills to block him before he could draw his sword in an instant, but he also seemed to be a member of the main sect. So Guac Mungiai asked, "Who are you?" Then the young man took out a plaque from his bosom and showed it to him. Upon seeing it, Guac Mungiai's eyes widened. The pattern engraved on that plaque was none other than the emblem of the Bright Blade King. Sitting on a chair and staring intently at the incense stick, the Guardian Unit leader Yang Muon yawned loudly. Then he lowered his head diagonally and shifted his gaze away from the incense stick to somewhere else. It was a treasure vault filled with secret manuals. The person he was looking at was Mok Jiangun, who was holding a book and staring at it intently. Until now, he seemed to be skimming through the secret manuals rather carelessly. However, unlike the other secret manuals, he was holding this one and concentrating on it, so it seemed he had finally found the right secret manual. That's good. He might have come out before completing a Sikhen. Just then, the person who had been watching Mok Jiangun flinched and stood up, looking behind him. What is it? He felt someone's presence. It didn't seem to be senior warrior Guac Mungiai who had come. The person who had just entered was a master of a much higher level than Guac Mungiai. At this level, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they were almost at the unit leader level. Who could it be? If it wasn't Guac Mungiai who had entered. Step. As he was on guard, the sound of footsteps could be heard. In his sight, he saw someone with a slender build wearing a straw hat with a veil, and a handsome young man walking slightly behind. So unit leader Yang Muon spoke in a voice loud enough for them to hear. Who are you? For now, there was a high probability that they had come from the main headquarters, considering they knew the location of this place. However, even if they were from the main headquarters, no one could enter this place without permission. At that moment, the handsome young man took something out from his bosom, and showing it, he cupped his hands together in a salute and said, "Are you the one in charge of the treasure vault? I am Yip Weixian, a disciple of the Bright Blade King." A disciple of the Bright Blade King? Interest gleamed in unit leader Yang Muon's eyes. For a disciple of the Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings who led the Heaven and Earth Society, to come here, what on earth was going on? To think he's only in his early 20s and at this level. It was surprising. The rumors that most of the 5 kings' disciples were masters at the unit leader level or above were not unfounded. Just based on his chi sensitivity, it seemed impossible to guarantee victory against him. Then who was the person beside him? Even though they're close by, their presence is barely detectable. I can't even judge their level based on chi sensitivity. Master. Even higher than himself, who was currently at the peak realm. So unit leader Yang Muon was about to ask who the person beside the disciple of the Bright Blade King was. I am unit leader Yang Muon, the guardian of the treasure vault. The person beside. You're the one in charge of the treasure vault, right? Then there's a secret manual I'm looking for inside. May I enter? Before he could even ask, the disciple of the Bright Blade King asked if he could enter the treasure vault to find something. Unit leader Yang Muon shook his head and replied, I apologize, but according to the rules, no one can enter this place freely. Rules? Corpse Blood Valleys. No. The sect's rules. I don't know how you, a disciple of the Bright Blade King, found out about this location, but according to the rules, this place is not accessible except in special circumstances. If there's something you're looking for, please go to the treasure vault in the main headquarters. I need the original. At Yip Weixian's words, unit leader Yang Muon's eyes narrowed. He didn't know where they had obtained this information, but they knew the secret of this treasure vault. Who had revealed this fact to them? Wondering, unit leader Yang Muon shook his head again. Even if they knew the truth that this was a treasure vault containing the originals, according to the rules, he couldn't let them enter. I'm sorry. Even if you're a disciple of one of the 5 kings, you can't enter this place, so please leave. Oh my. I really didn't want to say this, but Unit Leader Yang. Do you know who this person in front of your eyes is? How could he know when their face was covered? As he was puzzled, the person in the veiled straw hat lifted the hem of their robe and revealed a round plaque made of jade. The moment he saw it, Yang Muwan knelt on one knee. Then he cupped his hands together in a salute and said, Unit Leader Yang Muwan greets the Shig. Quiet. The person in the straw hat revealed their voice. It was the voice of a woman, not a man. At the command of this veiled person, Unit Leader Yang Muwan stopped speaking. Why is she here? Although Unit Leader Yang Muwan tried his best not to show it, he inwardly clicked his tongue. Was this woman the famous one? He had heard rumors about her, but it was quite surprising. Was she at this level? Based on his chi sensitivity, it was impossible to gauge her level, so the circulating rumors were true. Overwhelmed by the veiled woman's imposing presence, the disciple of the Bright Blade King Yip Weixian spoke. Then may we enter? As he said that, he tried to enter with the veiled person, but Unit Leader Yang Muwan hurriedly stood up and blocked them. What is the meaning of this? I apologize. But inside there is currently... I know. Isn't there a cadet who obtained top score plaques in the Corpse Blood Valley trials and entered to receive a martial arts secret manual? How do you know that? I heard it from the senior warrior of Corpse Blood Valley at the bottom of the cliff. They had already heard it from senior warrior Guak Munjiai. So, Unit Leader Yang Muwan said with a troubled expression, If you already know, could you please wait a little longer? Inside the treasure vault at a time. We will quietly find what this person is looking for and leave. Surely, Unit Leader, you're not telling this person to wait just for a mere cadet to choose a secret manual. That's... Unit Leader Yang Muwan was in a difficult position. According to the rules, if someone was already inside the treasure vault, those who wanted to enter next had to wait. However, Yang Muwan couldn't stop the veiled woman in front of him. She possessed that level of authority. I understand. Please enter. However, since there are rules, I kindly request that you quietly find what you're looking for and leave. And try not to disturb the cadet who is selecting a secret manual. He was about to say that but didn't. He judged that people of their caliber wouldn't deliberately bother a cadet who had received top score plaques and come to receive a reward in Corpse Blood Valley. Ho, I understand. Let's go in. And so they finally entered the treasure vault. They paid no heed to Unit Leader Yang Muwan's restless demeanor. Once inside, the disciple of the Bright Blade King Yip Weixian said to the veiled woman in amazement, Oh my, it's really similar. Indeed. The veiled woman also nodded in agreement. She had heard that the structure of the main headquarters treasure vault had been replicated here, but it felt like it had been almost entirely transplanted. As they looked around, they soon headed towards the upper floor of the treasure vault. The secret manual they were looking for was on the second floor. That person up there seems to be the cadet who received 3 top score plaques. At that, the veiled woman's gaze also turned to Mok Jiangun on the 3rd floor. Watching Mok Jiangun, who was concentrating on something, the veiled woman spoke. 3 top score plaques in Corpse Blood Valley. That's impressive. At her words, the eyebrows of Yip Weixian, a disciple of the Bright Blade King, twitched slightly. Then he smiled and said, He seems quite capable. However, among the disciples of the 5 kings, there is no one who couldn't achieve that level. No, wouldn't they have obtained more than 3? Yip Weixian naturally mentioned the disciples of the 5 kings, implying that if he who was included among them had participated in the Corpse Blood Valley trials, he would have obtained not just 3, but all of the top score plaques. Even though she understood his intention, the veiled woman showed no particular reaction. Instead, she muttered while looking at Mok Jiangun, a cadet who obtained 3 top score plaques is likely to become a disciple of one of the executives. That's probably true. At the point of obtaining 3 top score plaques, he had the highest probability of being the most outstanding among the cadets. With this level, he would likely pass the final trials smoothly and be chosen by one of the executives. However, in response to her continued interest, Yip Weixian replied, If his abilities are truly exceptional, that may be the case. But the executives also have their own preferences, so it's uncertain what will happen. Still, for a talent of that caliber, it would be good to make his acquaintance lightly for the future. At her words, Yip Weixian felt displeased inwardly. He had gone through the trouble of creating this opportunity, but she was showing interest in a mere cadet who had participated in the Corpse Blood Valley trials, which didn't sit well with him. Yip Weixian raised his head and looked at Mok Jaeyoung. Seeing him concentrating on something, Yip Weixian soon said to the veiled woman, "Then young lady, please wait a moment. There's no need. It's beneath your dignity to personally approach a mere cadet. I will bring him to you." "All right." Having said that, Yip Weixian went up to the third floor where the bookshelves were. Upon reaching the top, Yip Weixian snorted. He had suspected it, but after coming up he realized that this cadet fellow had fallen into a state of selflessness. If that weren't the case, he would have at least been aware and glanced at them on the lower floor, but he never directed his gaze at them even once. Yip Weixian found this strange. "What should I do?" Yip Weixian glanced at the veiled woman waiting on the lower floor. He was displeased that she was showing interest in a mere cadet. So he was conflicted. Enlightenment, huh? The fact that he was staring at the book with such a blank expression, completely unaware of his presence even though he had come right next to him, meant that he had undoubtedly gained some kind of enlightenment. It was likely in progress at the moment. Usually, in such a situation, one would either not interfere or, if they had a close relationship, set up a protective formation to prevent anyone from disturbing him. That's because if the enlightenment was mistakenly disrupted while it was in progress, it could lead to becoming a living dead or, in severe cases, falling into a state of delusion. Well, it's none of my business. His only intention was to bring this fellow to the young lady. The young lady couldn't wait for this bastard. Yip Weixian raised the corner of his mouth, smirking. "Don't blame me. It was just your bad luck." If the young lady hadn't shown interest, he wouldn't have deliberately disrupted the enlightenment. And so, Yip Weixian reached out his hand towards Mok Jaeyoung. Just a light touch and that enlightenment. Right at that moment, swish. Mok Jaeyoung, who had been blankly concentrating on the secret manual, slowly turned his head to the side while keeping his upper body still and looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Huh?" For a moment, Yip Weixian couldn't hide his bewilderment as their eyes met. Did this fellow's consciousness return at this very moment? This was extremely awkward. It was right before his hand was about to touch Mok Jaeyoung's head. So what should he say about this? For now he had to make up an excuse. This is. Intentionally touching someone during a state of selflessness or visualization is said to be an act of deliberately inducing mental demons, isn't it? For a moment he was at a loss for words. Why was this fellow who had just emerged from visualization so quick to grasp the situation? Feeling like a thief whose foot was tingling, Yip Weixian was perplexed about what to say, but, "You did it knowingly, didn't you?" "Hey cadet. You're misunderstanding something. No need for discussion." "What?" There was no time to block or do anything. In an instant, Yip Weixian's head was struck hard on the larynx by the blade of the hand between the thumb and index finger, causing his head to tilt back. Chapter 100. This. Chong Ryong hesitated as she saw a tall, handsome young man approaching Mok Jaeyoung. Judging by the look in the approaching young man's eyes, he did not seem to have good intentions. Currently, Mok Jaeyoung was in a state of oblivion, having gained enlightenment during his meditation. Beyond simply being immersed, if disturbed incorrectly in this state, there was a risk of the energy flowing in reverse, potentially leading to chi deviation, also a deviation of cultivation. Could it be that he intends to disturb Mok Jaeyoung? Certainly seemed that way. She hesitated, wondering if she should break out of the wooden puppet and intervene. As Mok Jaeyoung's servant spirit, their fates were intertwined. Swish. As expected, the young man was reaching out his hand. Damn that mortal. To do this at such a crucial moment. Just as she thought this. Swoosh. In that instant, a portion of the death energy, the killing intent that had escaped Mok Jaeyoung's body, was suddenly sucked back in as if nothing had happened. Along with it, Mok Jaeyoung's blank eyes came back to life. Mok Jaeyoung's eyes now shone with a radiant light and had gained depth. She had been worried about a heart demon appearing, but it seemed he had achieved some success. Confirming this, she hurriedly shouted, "Look to your right." At her cry, Mok Jaeyoung instinctively turned his head to the side. As he turned, someone was bringing their hand towards his forehead, nearly touching it. "What are you doing?" At Mok Jaeyoung's question, the tall young man, Bright Blade King's disciple Yip Weixian, couldn't hide his bewilderment. It was natural as he had reached out with ill intentions. Can't you see? That mortal was trying to disturb you. Disturb. When you're in a state of meditation or oblivion, if you're disturbed, you may fall into a heart demon. If that happens, the heart demon will arise and the energy will flow in reverse, causing adverse effects. That is precisely chi deviation. Hearing this, Mok Jiangun looked coldly at Yip Weixian in front of him. It was the first time seeing his face, yet he had approached with malice. I've heard that touching someone during a state of oblivion or meditation is an intentional act of causing a heart demon. Is that correct? There was no answer. With just this, Mok Jiangun reached his own conclusion. You did it on purpose, didn't you? That's. No need for explanations. What? Ugh. Suddenly, Yip Weixian's head was thrown back as Mok Jiangun's thumb and index finger struck his Adam's apple. It could be said that he had let his guard down due to the shock of being caught trying to intentionally cause a heart demon, but the speed of that strike just now was incredibly fast. This bastard? What was that? Based on his perception, Yip Weixian only felt like a first-rate expert. But how could his hands be so fast? However, now was not the time to be surprised. Damn it, he just had to hit the throat. Among the vital points, when struck on the throat, one's breath is momentarily blocked, making it difficult to circulate energy freely. Thus, cough cough. Yip Weixian coughed and performed a somersault in the air, spinning and utilizing footwork to distance himself. Having been caught off guard, he needed a moment to recover. However, Mok Jiangun seemed to have no intention of allowing that. Pat. Tata-tata-tek. Mok Jiangun leaped up and unleashed a series of kicks. Seeing this, Chong Ryong couldn't hide her inner astonishment. The footwork Mok Jiangun was displaying was the fourth stance of the shadowless flash kick. 1. Papa-papa-pack. Damn it. Yip Weixian hadn't even drawn his sword yet, and the incoming kicks forced him to use his fist techniques. Even though Bright Blade King Sun Yun was renowned for his sword techniques, there was no way he wouldn't have prepared for situations involving hand-to-hand combat. Swish. He managed to block the kicks, but Yip Weixian's feet were pushed back. This caused Yip Weixian to be unable to hide his inner bewilderment. Even though he couldn't properly circulate his energy after being hit in the throat, for someone who had reached the peak of the transcendent realm to be pushed back while blocking kicks? Who the hell is this guy? He was perplexed by the unexpected level of skill. However, thinking that the young lady downstairs was witnessing this scene, anger suddenly surged within him. It couldn't be helped that the original plan had been ruined, but this was a proper humiliation. Thus, huff. While deploying his defensive fist technique, Yip Weixian switched to a simplified stance with his left hand. It was a difficult task to block Mok Jiangun's kicks with a single fist, so while transitioning he was hit in the chest and left shoulder, but thud. At the same time he was able to draw the large sword strapped to his back. Shing. As soon as he drew the sword, Yip Weixian immediately unleashed a sword technique. Bright Single Blade Technique, 2. Third Stance. Single Strike Sword Rotation, 3. Faced with the domineering sword energy infused with sharpness, Mok Jiangun twisted his body to the side and instantly created a brief moment of aerial time. Papa-papa-pack. Crash. No sooner had he done that than 5 sections of the bookshelf behind him were split in half. The range of the sharp energy was wider than expected. However, seeing the secret manuals that were cut in half along with the bookshelves, Yip Weixian's face turned pale. Gasp. In the heat of the moment he had thought to cut down the guy with his sword, but he had ended up cutting nearly 30 secret manuals in half. Fortunately, the third floor didn't have the bookshelves fully filled with secret manuals, so only this many were cut, but cutting the original secret manuals with sharp energy was a huge mistake. Damn it. Even though his master was one of the 5 kings, he might still receive a severe punishment for this. Thinking about that, Yip Weixian became even more enraged. Because of this bastard, things had become thoroughly messed up. This won't do. Yip Weixian stabbed his sword into the ground. Then he concentrated his energy into one hand, forming a sharp blade of energy. The giant sword he had received from his master was too large, so unleashing sword techniques with sharp energy would cause too much damage to the surroundings. Even if there was some energy consumption, it was better to use his bare hands to control the sharp energy. I'll kill you in one strike. Now that things had come to this, he had to kill the guy. That way, there wouldn't be any talk about him disturbing the guy's meditation. It's not meant to be used in a place like this, but Yip Weixian assumed an extraordinary stance. The bright single blade technique consisted of a total of 11 stances and had 5 hidden ultimate techniques. His master Bright Blade King Sun Yun had said, "Only use the ultimate techniques on those you must kill." That was because each of those ultimate techniques was a sure kill move. Most martial artists wouldn't want their stances to be known or analyzed by others, but this was even more true for ultimate techniques. The less they were analyzed, the more they held the meaning of certain death. Pat. Yip Weixian launched his body. Bright single blade technique, second ultimate technique. Fatal retribution, 4. The trajectory of the sword instantly split into 5 branches, converging like a whirlwind towards the center, and the sword strokes concentrated on a single point as they charged forward. Among the ultimate techniques, this was his favorite stance, and if one was hit by it, their chest would be completely blown away, resulting in certain death. Die. It was at that very moment. Shimmer. As Mok Jiangun clenched his sword fingers, the air around his fingertips shimmered like a mirage. It was a phenomenon caused by the manifestation of sharp energy. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her surprise. This meant that Mok Jiangun had attained enlightenment and had reached the complete peak realm. This guy can use sharp energy? Yip Weixian also saw this. Seeing the sharp energy emanating from Mok Jiangun's sword fingers, he realized that Mok Jiangun was at least at the mature peak realm or above. He.s hiding his true skill. Then it was all the more reason to do his utmost to kill the guy. In that fleeting moment, Mok Jiangun's concentration reached its peak. I can see it. It was a strange occurrence. Perhaps it was because he had experienced various stances while becoming one with the universe through a state of oblivion. In Mok Jiangun's eyes, he could see how the sword strokes of the fatal retribution stance unleashed by Yip Weixian would complete their trajectory. Upon seeing this, he noticed a faint opening. Pat. Without any hesitation, Mok Jiangun moved towards the opening he had spotted. It was incredibly fast. Yip Weixian curled his lips bitterly. Foolish fellow. The only way to break the fatal retribution stance was to maintain a distance and aim for the gap when the sword strokes converged and then dispersed again. Approaching this closely would only make the stance more powerful, and it was no different from throwing away one's life. Swoosh. Mok Jiangun's sword fingers entered the very center of his sword stance. The 5 branches of sharp sword energy wrapped around Mok Jiangun's sword fingers, wrist, shoulder, waist, and chest, attempting to split his entire body into 5 pieces. It was at that very moment. Papapapping. The moment before they touched Mok Jiangun's body, the 5 branches of sharp sword energy were deflected as if bouncing off. What? The opening became even more apparent. Mok Jiangun's sword fingers accurately aimed for that opening. The opening was Yip Weixian's left eye. The sword fingers infused with sharp energy flew towards the left eye like a bolt of lightning. This can't be. It was too fast to avoid. It was at that very moment. Just as Mok Jiangun's sword fingers were about to touch the eye, someone grabbed his wrist. At the same time, Yip Weixian's wrist, who was unleashing the sword technique, was also grabbed by that someone. It was a slender woman wearing a bamboo hat. Young lady. Thud. Ugh. Yip Weixian's wrist was twisted and he was forced to kneel on the ground. Startled by this, Yip Weixian raised his head trying to say something, but he was suddenly at a loss for words. The eyes visible through the veil were cold beyond description. It was as if those eyes were telling him to shut his mouth. Swish. The woman who had silenced Yip Weixian turned her head. There was a glint in her eyes behind the veil. It was because Yip Weixian, the second disciple of Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings, couldn't withstand her martial power and was forced to kneel. But Mok Jiangun was different. Rather than making him kneel, she had intended to push him away, but he didn't budge. He's resisting the power of a 3-star warrior. It was surprising. At first glance, he seemed to be at most a first-rate expert. However, seeing him use sharp energy, she realized that he was a master who had reached the peak realm. So she thought the power of a 3-star warrior would be enough, but he was holding his ground. Tremble. As expected of a cadet who received 3 plaques. With this level of skill, you'd be stronger than most other sect's masters. At her words, Mok Jiangun's eyes narrowed. Although she wasn't using the energy of the Danjian, This woman's internal energy was extraordinary. The face vaguely visible through the veil was very young. However, judging by the energy emanating from her, she possessed a vast amount of internal energy reminiscent of the Valley Master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Li Jiom. You're the one with delicate wrists but extraordinary martial power. Can I ask who you are? Crazy. How dare you address her as Squeeze. Ah. Quiet. The woman in the bamboo hat who had warned Yip Weixian while squeezing his wrist even harder, smiled and said, Why so Yun? Why so Yun? Just knowing her name didn't reveal who she was. But then she continued, I am Wai So Yun, the third disciple of the Heaven and Earth Society's society leader. Chapter 101. I am Wai So Yun, the third disciple of the Heaven and Earth Society's leader. Mok Jiangun's eyes shone with surprise. He never expected to encounter someone so close to the leader of the Heaven and Earth Society in a place like this. Moreover, a disciple. He had thought it strange when she suddenly entered the treasure vault without regard for the rules. But now that he knew her identity, it made some sense. A candidate for the next leader. Mok Jiangun had briefly heard information about important internal figures through the Valley Master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Li Jiom. The leader of the Heaven and Earth Society had 3 disciples who were qualified to be successors. One of them was none other than the third disciple, Wai So Yun. Despite being a woman, she was known to possess a rare martial talent that appeared only once every few hundred years, which was why she was accepted as a disciple. She was said to have ambition and was aiming for the position of the leader. To think I'd meet such a woman here. It was truly a coincidence. Judging by Chong Ryong's silence, it seemed that her emotions had been stirred upon hearing that Wai So Yun was the society leader's disciple. When it came to matters related to the leader, she couldn't contain her anger. But her strength is no ordinary matter. Having gained enlightenment, he now knew how to handle the energy within his body. However, unlike him, she was standing in an extremely ordinary posture while holding his wrist, yet there was not the slightest movement. Moreover, she was holding another fellow with her other hand. Is this the level of the Heaven and Earth society leader's disciple? If the youngest disciple was at this level, he could roughly estimate the level of those above her. And just how strong would the society leader of the Heaven and Earth Society be? What was certain was that even though he had gained enlightenment, he had yet to reach the level of the society leader's disciple. At that moment, Yip Weixian, the disciple of Bright Blade King who had his wrist twisted and was in pain, pressed on. Haha. What are you doing? How dare a mere disciple of the Corpse Blood Valley not show respect even after knowing the young lady's identity? Crack. Ack. Before he could finish his words, Yip Weixian's wrist was completely twisted and the bone was broken. Since an intact bone had been broken, it was natural for a scream of pain to escape, but Yip Weixian gritted his teeth with his face swollen as if the blood vessels were about to burst. To him, Wai So Yun, the third disciple of the society leader, spoke in a cold voice. I believe I told you to be quiet. I apologize. Do I need to list out the things you have done with my own mouth? No, you don't. In fact, Yip Weixian had nothing to say even if he had 10 mouths. Not many had the authority to enter the treasure vault without regard for the rules. Even though he was a disciple of Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings, he naturally did not have access to this place. He had only entered by taking advantage of Wai So Yun's authority as the society leader's disciple. However, in the midst of that, he had gotten excited and damaged some of the original secret manuals in the treasure vault. This alone had already crossed a line that he couldn't handle. Your foolish actions have also put me, who brought you here, in quite a predicament. So if you open your mouth again, I will execute you on the spot. I will keep that in mind. Huff. Yip Weixian firmly closed his mouth. He shouldn't upset her any further. Wai So Yun, who had released Yip Weixian's hand, similarly released Mok Jiangun's wrist. And she said, I apologize. Forgive this person's rudeness. He is quite loyal, which is why I keep him around, but I never thought he would do such a foolish thing like today. At her words, Mok Jiangun brought his wrist and examined it. The handprint was still there. Looking at it, Mok Jiangun chuckled and then turned his gaze to Yip Weixian, saying, A loyal but stupid dog must be quite tiresome for you. This bastard. At Mok Jiangun's words, Yip Weixian's face instantly distorted terribly. However, he couldn't open his mouth, knowing that if he disobeyed her words again, he wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. At that moment, Wai Soyun chuckled. A loyal but stupid dog. Quite a fitting description indeed. Even the young lady. Yip Wai-sian's insides were boiling. He had arranged this situation to make a better impression on her and deepen their relationship. But in an instant he had become a stupid dog. Then Mok Jung-un politely clasped his hands and said, "Swish." Unit leader Mok Jung-un pays his respects to Miss Wai So-yun, the third disciple of the society leader. Mok Jung-un? At Mok Jung-un's greeting, she tilted her head slightly. The Mok surname was quite rare throughout the martial world of the Central Plains. She had never heard of it within the Heaven and Earth Society, and the only one she had heard of was the Yun Mok Sword Manor, one of the righteous sect's famous martial families. Yun Mok Sword Manor. It's unlikely. Even she was unaware of the fact that the children of the Yun Mok Sword Manor had been taken as hostages to the Heaven and Earth Society, as it was known only to a very few within the organization. Moreover, who would think to send hostages to the Corpse Blood Valley? She then said, "If you're a unit leader, you must be facing the final test." That's right. In fact, she had already heard through the senior warrior Guak Munjiai that Mok Jung-un was facing the final test. However, she was only pretending not to know because she had become interested in Mok Jung-un. Wai So-yun looked at Mok Jung-un's face. He's really handsome. She had never seen a man this beautiful before. At a glance, Mok Jung-un's face was so handsome that he could even be mistaken for a woman, surpassing mere good looks. However, she was more interested in Mok Jung-un's martial arts than his appearance. He doesn't seem to be older than 17, but if he's already at the level of a sect master, he should be able to pass the final test without any issues. In that case, he would be chosen by the executives. As the successor structure was gradually emerging within the Heaven and Earth Society, she was trying to recruit as many useful talents as possible. He seems like a good talent. If he was a step above Yip Wai-sian, who had been taught by Bright Blade King Sun Yun, then his future was promising. It wouldn't hurt to recruit him in advance at this opportunity. She directly brought up the main topic. Your solid internal energy shows that you have the potential to reach the pinnacle stage of peak realm or even beyond in the near future. Oh, is that so? So, I was wondering. I apologize, but may I say a word? No, two things to you first. Huh. When Mok Jung-un suddenly interrupted her, she momentarily frowned. It was quite rude of him, even though he knew her identity. However, since Yip Wai-sian, whom she had brought along, had also been rude, and with the thought of wanting to make Mok Jung-un her person, she decided to tolerate it. All right. Speak freely. It's fortunate that you are a magnanimous person. At Mok Jung-un's words, she smiled slightly. If she could recruit a talented person as her own, she could show this much magnanimity. First, since you are the society leader's disciple, I believe you have the authority. Originally, I was supposed to have the reward of choosing secret manuals here for an hour. With these words, Wai So-yun immediately understood what Mok Jung-un was saying. Due to Yip Wai-sian and herself, Mok Jung-un had been robbed of that time. Perhaps he had mentioned authority to ask the keeper of the treasure vault to grant him that. Don't worry. Even if you don't mention it, I was planning to ask the keeper of the treasure vault, Valley Master Yang, about that matter. Of course, it wasn't something she had just thought of, but it was true. At Wai So-yun's words, Mok Jung-un smiled as if relieved. Then he continued. Thank you for your consideration. The second thing is, thanks to the person sitting over there, I nearly lost my life, so I'd like to receive proper compensation. What? At Mok Jung-un's words, Wai So-yun furrowed her brows. That was because she had personally apologized and even broke Yip Wai-sian's wrist, who was a disciple of Bright Blade King. Breaking his wrist here was also partly to show it to Mok Jung-un. But he wanted compensation? What nonsense is this bastard spouting now? Yip Wai-sian glared at Mok Jung-un as if he was angry. If it weren't for her warning, he would have wanted to engage in a rematch immediately. At that moment, Wai So-yun spoke. May I hear what you mean by proper compensation? Since I nearly lost my life to match the equivalent exchange, wouldn't it be right for me to receive his life in return? Grit. Was this guy crazy? No matter how much humiliation he had suffered, he was a disciple of Bright Blade King Sun Yun, one of the 5 kings. Yet he was saying that he should receive his life? This bastard really. That's what I thought, but if I do that, I would be making you lose your loyal and stupid dog. So I would be grateful if you could provide me with suitable compensation. Suitable compensation? Yes. Since I nearly lost my life, I think it's fair for me to receive that much from him, don't you think? At Mok Jae-un's words, not only Yip Hwai-seon, who was the subject of the conversation, but even Hwai So-yeon couldn't help but snort. She had seen many people within the organization, but this was the first time she had seen someone so brazen, even though he was just a disciple who had entered the corpse blood valley. He was requesting compensation from her who could potentially become the next leader. It was somewhat refreshing, but it also made her slightly annoyed. Looks like he's not just talented in martial arts. Through the brief conversation, she judged that Mok Jae-un was a person who pursued his own interests more than he appeared. Because of that, she lost a bit of interest. What she wanted was someone who was not only outstanding in martial arts but could also swear unwavering loyalty to her. But to bargain with the person who would become his lord? If he's that brazen, let's see how he responds to this. So she decided to test Mok Jae-un. Since she had already confirmed his outstanding martial arts, she was going to see if his wit matched the boldness he had shown towards her. Life. All right. There is some truth to your words. I'm glad that you are someone who understands reason. Then kill him. Excuse me. At her words, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed slightly. It was an unexpected response. In fact, the reason Mok Jae-un had made such a request to her was to see the caliber of a successor who was aiming for the leader's position. But he didn't expect her to tell him to kill Yip Hwai-seon on the spot. That's unexpected. What's unexpected? I personally apologized and even broke this person's wrist as a price for his rudeness. But if you say it's not enough for the price of your life, there's no choice, is there? So you're telling me to kill him? That's right. I can't think of a compensation that can replace a life. At her words, Yip Hwai-seon's expression instantly darkened. To think that his lord, to whom he had sworn loyalty, would make him give his life to this bastard. Was she being serious? While he was thinking that, Hwai So-yeon said, "However, I cannot take responsibility for what happens after you kill this person." Cannot take responsibility? Yes. You don't seem to know who this person is, so I'll tell you his identity. He is Yip Hwai-seon, a disciple of Bright Blade King. At her words, Mok Jae-un turned his gaze to look at Yip Hwai-seon. Now he fully understood her intention. It wasn't that she was really telling him to kill. She was saying to kill him if I had the confidence to handle the aftermath. She had bluntly stated it. He was free to kill Yip Hwai-seon, but he would have to directly deal with the repercussions that would arise from killing him. Those repercussions would naturally be the wrath of Bright Blade King. The choice is yours. However, I won't hold you responsible for taking the life of someone who had sworn loyalty to me, so I believe that should be sufficient compensation. At her words, Yip Hwai-seon's face slightly brightened. Of course, how could she abandon him? As expected, she had a plan. Damn that bastard. Yip Hwai-seon glared at Mok Jae-un. If this guy wasn't a fool, he wouldn't be able to lay a finger on him. Yip Hwai-seon made a vow to himself. He would definitely pay back the humiliation he was experiencing now many times over. While he was doing that, Mok Jae-un opened his mouth. If my ears aren't mistaken, it sounds like you're telling me not to do something I'll regret and to choose wisely. At Mok Jae-un's words, she chuckled. She naturally thought that he would have the brains to understand at least this much. However, if he gave up on his boldness and the compensation he had demanded here, it would ultimately mean that he was just a guy who talked big. That's what she was thinking. If you are someone who holds a position as the leader's disciple, you will surely keep your own words, right? At his words, she snorted and replied, "Words carry weight. I take responsibility for what I say." Is that so? Have you made your decision? Yes. I have no choice. I wanted to receive the price of his life for trying to take mine, but thinking about it, the repercussions from Bright Blade King bothers me. At Mok Jae-un's words, she lightly shook her head. He was just a person of this caliber. A fellow who schemed for compensation against her. No matter how outstanding his martial arts were, he didn't have the wit to navigate this situation and only lowered his head, showing that she had lost interest. Go. Wait a moment. What? It was at that very moment. Swish. Thud. Mok Jae-un moved swiftly and kicked Yip Hwai-seon's chin with his foot. Ugh. Yip Wai-sean, who was suddenly hit on the chin, shouted at Mok Jong-un in bewilderment. You bastard, how dare you? Oh. You opened your mouth. What? Didn't your lord just say that if you opened your mouth she would execute you on the spot? You ignored that warning. At Mok Jong-un's words, Yip Wai-sean's expression instantly froze. This bastard, did he kick him with his foot just now to make him open his mouth? While he was thinking that, Mok Jong-un turned his head, smiled brightly and spoke to Wai So-yun in a sneering voice. Didn't you say that words carry weight and that you take responsibility for what you say yourself?